For those of you who are new to Label Matrix, thank you for joining us for the Label Matrix 2019 free webinar. We'll just jump right into it. Our itinerary for today is we'll be talking about the new label wizard. We're going over that. There are actual object creation wizards, and I'll briefly touch on that. But if you wish to learn more about it that way, I highly recommend playing with the wizard and finding out all the features and functions of the software. It is very informative and very intuitive. We'll also be going over how to set up printer drivers, and we'll also be adding one of every object type. We'll be going over text object, paragraph objects, linear barcodes, 2D barcodes, shapes, images, text art, and rich text fields, as well as some alignment and grouping options, which are located down below here. So first things first, let's get along with the new label wizard. So there's a couple different ways to do this. When you open up the program, if you have wizards enabled, currently you won't see it on this one as I already have a label selected. But if you're creating a new label, the label wizard will appear if you have wizards enabled. Additionally, you can also get to it by clicking the New button, as you can see right here, or you can select File, New, and that will also bring up the new label wizard. Now, we will go over the options here, but we will be using this pre-made label in the background. So as you can see, you can select a different printer if you want something different than what you currently have selected. You can change the label page dimensions, set up margins, or print multiple labels per page, such as a multi-label page setup. You can also connect the database to the label at the time of the wizard. You can also choose how many duplicates print for each label, whether you want them to or if you just wanted to print one label per label. And you can also choose to not show this wizard in the future. So if we hit the next button, you can see there is a description field. This is treated like a notepad. It's notes for yourself regarding the actual label itself, for any information that might be useful to an end user or production user. So in an instance, if this label is only for the shipping department, you could put that as a note. That way, just in case anyone opens up the label by accident, they could see the description and go, oh, okay, I guess this is for the shipping department. We don't want to use this label. Simply hit finish, and it will create your label with the dimensions of the label template that you have created with any options that you have selected and set up. But as I mentioned, we'll be using this pre-rendered label. And if you do wish to learn a little bit more about the wizard, I highly recommend testing it out. It is fairly straightforward to use. As you saw, it's roughly about 1 or 2 pages or windows. And then once you hit the finish button, it creates your label template. Now, we will be going over, like I said, the new image wizard, essentially. And as you can see, we're just going to be skimming over this as we don't have time to go over the wizard in every single object creation, as this would take hours. But I highly recommend taking a look into it when you first start using the software, as it is very, very helpful in determining what you can do with each type of object. And as you can see, all of the objects that we're going to be covering today are located within the wizard. We have text objects, paragraph objects, images, linear barcodes, 2D barcodes, text art, rich text fields, shapes, and that is pretty much it. I do find it a little bit easier just to create the objects directly, but for some folks, they do like a little bit more direction. And if you're a little bit more hands-on and you like to be guided through, the wizard is there to use it. Again, click on the little wizard wand with the barcode symbol at the very top, and you'll be able to select any object to create using the wizard. So first, let's go ahead and move on to the next section, which is installing your first printer driver. So there are a couple different ways to get to this, and you can click on this icon right here that looks like the little COM port cable, and that will bring up the printer setup screen. Or you can go to File and then Printer Setup. This will open up the printer selection screen, and as you can see, we have 3 different types of drivers. L drivers are legacy drivers, also known as native drivers. So if you have a very old piece of hardware, and we do have an L driver for it, I would recommend using that to get better communication. Otherwise, the best thing to do when using brand new software on a brand new operating system is to update your hardware accordingly. Otherwise, you can see some abnormalities in your printing. X drivers, or extended drivers, are installed directly from the software. They are TechLinks drivers. We use the manufacturer drivers and optimize them for performance, as well as additional options for the end user to use. As you can see here, I have an X driver installed, and we're going to be going ahead and removing that and adding it later. As you can see as well, we have one final category, is W for Windows driver, which is pretty self-explanatory, but essentially any driver that is recognized by Windows in your devices and printers under the control panel will be added to this list when the program is launched. So as you can see, I have several Windows drivers that I can choose from. Currently, I am using the bullzip PDF, and that is mainly for display purposes in case we ever have to do a print job and show you how to create something and then show you the result of that print job. But let's go ahead and add a printer driver. So we're going to go ahead and remove this Zebra ZM600 300 DPI and add it back. So click the Add button, and it brings us to the Add Printer wizard. Now, it does go over some information regarding what we just discussed about how internal drivers, meaning TechLinks drivers that you add from the software, have been optimized so that you can have additional features and functions in the software. I will also mention that internal drivers, such as the L drivers and the X drivers, are the only drivers that you will be able to change the settings from within the software. If you are using a Windows driver, you must navigate to the control panel under Devices and Printers and change the settings within the printing preferences of the driver there. So if we hit Next, we should see a list of manufacturers and makes and models. So let's go ahead and find Zebra, as we are going to be adding the Zebra ZM600 300 DPI. So once I've selected the manufacturer, we can see that we have a bunch of legacy and extended drivers available to us. Navigate on down to the ZMs. There's our ZM600 300 DPI. It is an internal driver. Let's go ahead and hit Next. As you can see here, we have the alias, which generally I would not recommend utilizing unless, of course, you are using it for a very specific purpose, calling out to the alias, or if you have multiple printers of the same make and model, but they're just in different locations of your facility. Main example of this is, let's say I had 3 of the ZM600 300 DPI printers, because that's all we print on. But this particular printer is in the shipping department. I can give it the alias shipping or Zebra shipping, however you want to call it. That way, when I look at the alias of the printer, I know where that's going to end up. We don't actually need to use an alias for this, as I don't have a ZM600 currently here to connect to my PC, but that is essentially how you would change the name of the printer, essentially. As you can see, we have 3 ports to choose from. We have the local port, so anything that can be physically connected to your PC. And this includes COM ports, serial ports, as well as you can print to file. And additionally, you can print to fax. And I do believe there is also an infrared option, some sort of like a port for that as well. Although it's not very widely used, but it is an option that you can use. UNC stands for Universal Naming Convention. This essentially is connecting to a printer or sending a print job to a printer that's physically connected to another workstation. And you probably have seen this where it looks something like this, where it's // computer name / printer name, something like that. This is known as a Universal Naming Convention, or a UNC. It's basically a shared path that shows up as a port that you can print to on your Windows operating system. You can also choose to do TCP/IP if you have a network printer. You can enter the IP address in here. However, this will force direct access. We do recommend using Windows print spooling so you can queue up print jobs, and then if anything goes wrong, you can always cancel the print jobs from the queue. Otherwise, generally, more often than not, you'll end up having to go to the hardware and cancel out the print job directly from the printer. So we do recommend using TCP/IP to create a local standard TCP/IP port so that you're able to select it from this drop-down list. That way, you're able to enable Windows print spooling. So we are going to go ahead and select File, because otherwise, well, Label Matrix is going to yell at me when it doesn't detect my ZM600. So I'm just going to say, we want to set it there. Additionally, at the very end here, you can also choose to change your printer options. We won't do that here, as everyone has a different printer, and it would be virtually impossible to go over everyone's options. So I do highly recommend playing around with that, finding the right options that are best for you, that produces the best output of your label, and then sticking with that. Once I hit finish, there we go. There's our Zebra ZM600, and we should be able to print to it immediately, as long as, of course, you have the printer driver installed for one, and the printer actually is communicable with the Windows operating system that you're currently printing from. So let's go ahead and switch back to our bullzip PDF. Now let's get on with some object creation. First one up is our text object creation. As you can see, there are several options. I will go over this once, but most of the other objects will have the same exact tabs, with the exception of usually one to sometimes two tabs that are unique to the object that you're creating. Under the General tab, you can see that we can change the name of the object, we can provide a description for it, and have a conditional image status, whether or not it's enabled and printed, disabled and not printed, or conditional, meaning sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It's based on the condition that you give it. We can also do the color, foreground and background color. Generally, we recommend leaving this alone, as most of our end users are going to be using thermal printers or direct thermal printers, which means you can only print in monochromatic colors. And there are a few models of Epsons, if I'm not mistaken, that do a red coloring as well as the black and the white, so that would also be an acceptable foreground or background color. However, unless you're using inkjet printers or laserjet printers, this option really isn't for you. You can also choose the position at the anchor point where that object's going to appear, its justification, or its orientation. Then on the Font tab, you can select your font, whether it be graphical or printer resident. There are some Windows drivers that do come with printer resident fonts. Mostly, they do come with printer resident fonts for barcodes. There are a few that do have some actual printer resident fonts available for actual words. But keep in mind, if you're looking for printer resident fonts, we highly recommend using our drivers instead of the Windows drivers. So you can select your font here, select the point size, as well as the style, if any. The width of the actual characters can be condensed or expanded accordingly. And you can also add some cool effects. And finally, the main portion of the text object creation tool is our data. Now, as you can see, we can pull the information from multiple different places or create it from multiple different places. For the free webinar, we're just going to be sticking with constant information. This is static or fixed data, stuff that will not change unless you physically go in and change it. So let's go ahead and put in some information. There we go. And then we can place it on the label. Let's make that just a little bit smaller. There we go. And that is how you create a text object. Next, we'll be going over paragraph objects. As you can see, most of the same tabs still do exist, although we do have some data here. And I will be putting in some information, just copying and pasting, as this does make it a little bit smarter and quicker for us. There we go. And the one thing about paragraph fields that you'll notice that is unique to paragraph fields over text object creation is that it records the format just like Word. Not to the same extent as Word, but if you add a carriage return, as you just saw there, it does display the output of the carriage return. So think of it like a giant paragraph where whatever you're formatting the text to be inside this box, that's what's going to display in the actual output of the paragraph object. The unique tab that we can go over is the Power Wrap tab. And this allows you to make a bullet or numbered list. You can also add a hanging indent to that numbered or bulleted list, so it kind of stair steps down in a diagonal fashion. Another cool feature, especially for those who are making MSDS data sheets, is let's say you have that corrosive symbol directly in the middle of your label and you want to bring the words of the cautionary tale of what that chemical or product can do if it, well, is handled poorly. And you can have the information right over the image, flow around it, or wrap to the left or the right, respectively. You can also choose the space between the actual image object itself and the words. So give it a little buffer so the words aren't encroaching on the actual image itself. And let's say you do have a product that no longer uses that image, such as in a conditional statement, then you can ignore the missing graphics and overwrite and use it like a normal paragraph object. You can also change the extra space between the lines, and that is basically the tab spacing in between the sentences, not in between the words. You can increase or decrease that space in between each sentence. Additionally, the scale to fit, which is the final feature of the Power Wrap, allows us to increase the box or the object size, and the text within will either expand or decrease in font size depending on how much space is left inside the area. Best way just to show you how to do that. So you'll notice that it looks a little bit odd, but this is normal. So you want to grab that object and stretch it on out. And as you notice, we have all of the information right here. And if I stretch it further, it will auto kind of word wrap here a little bit and adhere to the size of the thing. Now you've noticed that the text is getting larger as we make this bigger, and that is the Power Wrap option. It allows you to make it larger or smaller based on the size of the object. And that is pretty much how we use paragraph objects. Next section we'll be going over is linear barcodes. So click on the linear barcode option there. And as you can see, we see a lot of our familiar tab friends here. So let's go ahead and give it some sample data for the time being and go to the barcode tab. Now, we can choose what type of symbology or barcode type we wish to use. Right now, it's currently set to a UPC-A, but let's just use a code 39 to make things nice and simple. You can change the height of the barcode here, or the density. Now, generally, we do not recommend using ultra high or very low, unless, of course, you have scanners that can handle that sort of configuration of barcode. However, it's always up to the end user, and depending on your spec sheet, if that is required, you can set the density of the barcode to whatever is required from your spec sheet. Generally, we more often than not see high, medium, and low sort of formats, but every environment is different. If you wanted to add a check digit to the end of this, you could also add the modulo 43 mod that will add a check digit to the end of the code 39 barcode. If you don't want a check digit, just leave the checksum at none. You can also choose where the human readable is, and that is the section at the bottom where the numbers are displayed. You can choose whether or not it is below, if you do not have it at all, if it's above, and you'll notice these little turtle symbols here. Now, there are two types of symbols that you will see throughout the creation of objects within this particular webinar. The little turtle, which means that you must have a graphical font selected in order to perform this function. If you do not have a graphical font, you won't be able to do this. The other one that you'll see, which we'll get to in the 2D barcodes, it looks like a little printer symbol. That means you must have a printer resident font in order to perform that function. If you don't have a printer resident font, you won't be able to use it. So let's go ahead and leave it alone, put it right back as it was. And of course, you can also change the width ratio or the mil.spec of the actual barcode itself. Generally, I don't recommend messing around with this unless, of course, your spec sheet tells you to do something very specific. Generally, whatever the barcode is by default created with is probably what it should be left at. But again, if your spec sheet tells you to do something different, make sure to adhere to the spec sheet. You can add a data identifier here if, let's say, this was to be a 01 identifier, such as a GTIN or a global trading item number, and that formats the barcode in a specific way. I would recommend using the GS1 wizard to create the barcode. If you're going to be doing it that way, it's basically using the wizard and selecting the GS1 128 barcode symbology, which we do see available right here, down here in the GS1 128, and you can add your application identifiers there. As for the data identifiers, generally I recommend leaving that blank. So let's go ahead and place our barcode. There we go. Now, the one thing I will mention about barcodes is that the font generally only affects the actual human readable. As you can see here, we're using a printer resident font. Let's go ahead and switch that to Arial, make it a little bit larger. And as you can see, that affected only the human readable, as the barcode must remain the same, otherwise when you scan it, you'll get a different value. So let's move on to 2D barcodes. Let's go ahead and use the QR code as an example. As you can see, we have many of the same different tabs, or same tabs that we have in the other object creation tools. As you can see, we can change our density as well as the model of our 2D barcode as well as our error correction. And for those who don't know what error correction is, it simply states that if, let's say, a portion of the barcode were to be destroyed, there are check digits hidden all throughout the barcode, so that when you take a look at it and scan it, if a check digit that equals this value that exists here, a value that exists here and here, well, that must mean that the rest of this string of data must equal this, this, and this string of data, because every check digit is unique to the string of data that it basically is created from. So it's basically able to reverse engineer what the strings of data were that were lost based on the check digits. Now, the one thing about barcodes that you'll notice with linear barcodes is that you can adjust them accordingly. But keep in mind that snap value. The bars need to be a certain width away from each other, otherwise they won't scan properly. So you can't just make it a little bit bigger. You have to go to the next snap value. Now, you'll notice something about the 2D barcodes, or at least some of them, is that we can't do that to them. And the reason being is that most 2D barcodes are data-driven. So if we wanted to change the size of the barcode, that means we need to either enter in less or different data. And as you noticed, it did change there just slightly. And that is how to create a 2D barcode. The next section we'll be going over is shapes. This one's pretty straightforward. So we'll go ahead and create a line, a square, and a circle. As you can see, we have some of the same tabs, although we do have something different. We can choose the thickness of the line here, as well as its position from and to, or we can simply draw it ourselves. And there we go. There's our line. Let's create a square. Same principle. We can change the thickness of the square, or even choose to fill it in with a color if we wish. There we go. And finally, let's create a circle. Again, same as the square, you can choose the thickness of the circle as well as fill it in. There we go. And that is how to use shapes. Now we'll be moving on to images. And as you can see, we have a lot of our same tabs. However, we are able to choose what types of image we want. Now, the data origin can be embedded or linked, come from a database or a keyboard prompt. The main difference between most of these is embedded versus linked. Embedded means that the actual image is saved to the actual template itself, so that way when you open up the label, the image remains. However, if it's linked, this absolute path is very, very important. If the file moves, the file name is changed, if it's altered in any way, shape, or form, it will break the link to that image, and you'll have to re-add it by simply clicking File, navigating to the image where it's located. Let's choose a faucet. Why not? We haven't used that one in a while. And then place it back on the label. Now, once you've placed the image, there are a few things that show up that you're able to mess with, and that is essentially the picture or the position options. As you can see, we have the basically the orientation, justification, the rotation, scale width, and height. One thing we do recommend is allow sizing. If you do allow stretching, it will distort the image. Allow sizing allows you to make it larger or smaller comparatively, although it's not quite as clean as let's say, a scalable vectored image, but it still can be if you choose to use a .svg as your image type. Now let's move on to text art. As you can see here, a lot of our same tabs exist, but we can go to text art. So let's add some data, shall we? Let's go ahead and put on label matrix is cool. And then as you can see, once we select the bend to text shape, you can see that we can rotate the object in any fashion that we see fit. We can rotate them counterclockwise so it's outwards, kind of like a CD. You can also have the sweep angle of where it's going to be like kind of curvature of the actual words, whether it's aligned, justified, left, right, or center. You can also have the page break happen at a character length, word length, or when you use a carriage return. You can also have the character spacing, much like with regular font or fixed text objects, where it can be dense, loose, or you can even create a custom spacing in between those words. Additionally, you can also rotate the characters so it is vertical around the size of whatever it is that you're trying to build. So that pretty much kind of covers the that object itself. So let's go ahead and place this, and you can see exactly how it behaves. Oops. There we go. And there we go. And as you can see, it's adhering to the type of curvature that we put on there. So let's say we were trying to build something that, had like a little symbol here, but we wanted to wrap this around it. There you go. And that is how to use text art. The last object that we'll be creating is a rich text field. And you will notice that this has the Power Wrap tab, as this uses the paragraph field to create it. Now, one thing is for certain is you do not want to put anything in this text area right here. And Enable Rich Text Format has been selected. You can create an actual paragraph object, select this, and then click on Edit RTF, which stands for Rich Text Field. Now, the text fields themselves, this is essentially what it's used for. Mainly superscript and subscript. So let's say we wanted to make this a solution of some kind, correct? So it looks just like it should if this appeared on some sort of chemical sheet. So we have to highlight our character that we want to use the super or the sub for, and we just go ahead and say, let's use that. So now it is going to shrink it just slightly, but you can use this to make it a little bit larger. And as you can see, this is essentially how you use superscript and subscript. It allows you to create graphical, not anomalies, obviously, but graphical differences in the paragraph structure. So you can either go below the paragraph line or above the paragraph line using superscript or subscript. Simply hit File, Exit, and Save. And as you can see, this is why you don't want to put any information in there, as this does pretty much mess up your actual sample preview data of what is trying to be applied to the object. And that pretty much covers it, ladies and then we can go touch on alignment and grouping fairly quickly, as that will be the last thing that we do. So let's go ahead and grab some of these objects, and we're just actually going to remove this object just so we have a little bit more space. And the same thing with this circle. Let's go ahead and do that too. Now let's say we had this paragraph object over here, and we wanted to align it with this object over here. So if you hold the Shift key and click on both objects, you can do alignment and grouping one of two ways. Right-click and align or group, or you can go to Edit and go to Group or Align, and both will do the same thing. Brings up our alignment window here, and we want to align to the left using the leftmost image as our alignment tool. Once we hit OK, there we go. And that is alignment. And let's say you wanted to put these two together so that when you grab the object, it all moves together instead of breaking apart, and you have to align it again and measure it up, make sure everything looks good. You can simply right-click and then group the objects together. Sorry about that. Looks like I had a little bit of a mouse issue. Let's try that one more time. There we go. And as you can see, both objects are highlighted now when I moved around just one of them. And that is how you group. Now there is one thing I do want to keep in mind. If we go to the properties of this new object that we've grouped together, you'll notice that our Power Wrap tab no longer exists, as well as the Data tab. And that is because it only shows the like tabs that exist in both objects. Additionally, there's only certain things you can change with grouped objects as they are multiple objects. So if you wish to go change something about the paragraph field or the text object field, you'll have to ungroup them first, and then you can simply go into their properties and get everything back the way it was. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the free Label Matrix 2019 webinar. We hope you've learned a little bit, and thank you very much.